Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
For thousands of years, Jews have seen bread not just as a food, but also as something special. From the Pesach or Passover matzah to the Shabbat challah, bread has been an important part of our spirituality. But one bread product has always been secular, the Bagel. This is the story of how the Bagel went from being a Jewish staple in a Polish village to being the bagel, the world's favourite roll. So what exactly is a bagel? Victoria Prever is the food editor of the Jewish Chronicle.
A bagel is a donut-shaped roll with a hole in the middle, but it's not just a roll with a hole. The key to a bagel is that it's in the cooking process, it's boiled and then baked. And the boiling gives it that shiny crust and then it puffs up once you bake it. And it's made from a very stiff, firm dough, which helps it keep that shape. But the key is that it's this circular shape with the hole, and it's chewy and crunchy.
Look, one thing we need to get straight before we go any further. Is it a bagel or a bagel?
I grew up eating bagels, which is what we called them at home, and we'd eat them tea times, all the time really, very much part of my existence. But I have grown into calling them bagels. So even if it sits slightly wrong, I've been bagelized.
We call them bagels.
I said bagel.
It's a bagel. Definitely a bagel.
It's a bagel.
It's a bagel. Definitely.
Well, I say it as a bagel, but if you were in Poland a couple of hundred years ago, you would have said bagel.
Well, people are quite defensive around here, especially people from the East End, so they call it bagel.
In New York, it's a bagel.
In Krakow, we say bagel.
Confused? Let's ask an expert. Dr. Sima Berry is a teacher of Yiddish at University College London.
Both are correct. Bagel or bagel. It depends where you come from and what kind of Yiddish you speak. In the Standard Yiddish and the Lithuanian Yiddish, you would probably say bagel, whereas in the Polish Yiddish, you would say bagel. I'm sure that there are other dialects in which you can probably say it slightly differently, almost like bagel, without even bending it.
So there you have it. Both are right. So make up your own mind. I'll stick to the original bagel as they do in Poland and the East End of London. So where does the bagel come from? In Vienna, local legend has it that it was invented in 1683 as a stirrup-shaped tribute to the great Polish horseman King Jan Sobieski, who saved the city from Turkish conquest. Nice story, but as bagels are mentioned in written records from Krakow in the early 1600s, we'll have to say goodnight Vienna. The story starts in 13th century Poland in the reign of Bolesław the Pious. It's said he wanted to get Jewish traders to settle in Poland, so in 1264 he issued the Statute of Kalisz. Until then, Jews in Poland had not been permitted to bake bread because the church said bread was holy and that Jews were not fit to touch it. There were many parts to the Statute of Kalisz, and tucked away at number 36 was the declaration that Jews may freely buy, sell and touch bread. But church officials quickly sought to control the Jews' new right, forbidding Christians from buying Jewish bread and telling congregations that Jewish-made bread was poisoned. The Jewish bakers made and sold their bread, but not just ordinary bread, a special circular roll that was first boiled, then baked, making it distinctive and different from bread supplied by other bakers. No one knows which way round the development occurred, but in the Middle Ages, the obłyzanek, a form of circular bread boiled then baked, became popular amongst migrants in Poland.
The history of obwarzenie goes back to 14th century. We don't know precisely when the first obwarzanek was made, but we know for sure that in 1394, Queen Jadwiga, who was wife to King Jagiełło, Polish king, bought some obwarzanki, and that was written down in financial books of the court from Wawel Castle. And that was a sentence that Queen, her lady, bought some obwarzanki and paid for them 1 grosz. Another thing from those times, which we know for sure, which is in documents, is that another king, King Olbracht, and that was around about 100 years later, in 15th century, decided that only bakers from Krakow and from Bakers Guild could produce obwarzanki. And Krakow in those times were much smaller. It was like the old town now. And only bakers who lived within the city walls could produce it. So all bakers outside the city, from Kazimierz or from Klepardia, which was another city connected with Krakow in those times, couldn't produce that. And if they did that, they did it against the king's will. And maybe that's why bagel started to be produced in Kazimierz district.
As the king banned non-guild bakers outside of Krakow from making the obwarzanek, could the form of the bagel be a way of getting round the prohibition? The obwarzanek is made of 2 strips of bread wound together, but the bagel is made from 1 piece and is smaller. The first known mention of the bagel by this name is in the community regulations of the city of Krakow in 1610, about the time they built the Remu or new synagogue in Krasmierz. This stated bagels should be given as a gift to women in childbirth, probably as it symbolised the ring of life. Another ordinance of the time tells people not to be too ostentatious by serving too many bagels at the bris, or in English the circumcision of their male children. Charles Darwin went on his voyage of the beagle round the world and observed evolution. The bagel evolved too as it travelled. This is the voyage of the bagel. Jews have often had to flee from persecution, and we took our food with us as we surfed the wave of adversity, heading for better things. The bagel became a world traveller and evolved along the way.
Bagels, 3 a penny. Bagels, who wants bagels? 3 a penny. Bagels. If you are coming up to London town to spend a day or so, take mine advice and go where the Yiddish breezes blow.
In 1855, at 155 Brick Lane in London's East End, the bagel shop opened and has been trading ever since. Brick Lane has always had its share of bagel bakeries and sellers in the street. There were the famous sisters, Esther and Annie, who, if you did not buy their wares, would curse you loudly in Yiddish. As bagel production stopped in Europe because of the Holocaust, as far as we can discover, this is the oldest bagel bakery in the world. Brick Lane has now become synonymous with the European style of bagel.
Brick Lane is a London institution. Everyone knows about Brick Lane, everyone who enjoys food or who's lived in that part of the world. The Brick Lane Bagel Bakery opened in 1855 and there's been a bagel bakery there ever since. It bakes 24/7. You can go in the middle of the night and pick up gorgeous hot fresh bagels and bagels as they would be because it's the Bagel Bakery, and they are the best of the British style bagels. So the British style of bagel is the traditional Polish style as it came over. So again, the dough is made, leavened maybe overnight, but leavened for a period of time to give it flavour. Then it's boiled quickly, probably up to a minute. The boiling really creates that crust, and if you boil too long, you get a thicker, chewier crust. If you boil quickly, you get a slightly thinner, chewy crust, which is what the British bagel has. Inside, it's chewy, but still some air, aerated. It's not like totally tough and chewy, but there is some air inside, and they come in various different flavours. English bagels traditionally would have been baked on wood, and I believe that the Brick Lane Bagel Bakeries still do that.
In its ongoing diaspora, the Bagel made its way to the New World as many Jewish migrants flocked to the USA. Areas like the Lower East Side of New York's Manhattan soon boasted many Bagel bakeries. At its peak in the 20th century, there were more than 70 in that area alone. So what makes the New York bagel special?
So New York bagels, they are made slightly differently. The traditional way would have been with a sourdough starter called a pouliche, which they mix up first. That will give it a slightly more sort of tangy, a sour flavour. That's left. The bagels, switching between my bagels and bagels, the bagels would be made up, then fermented in a cold area overnight so they don't rise, but they are, the flavour is growing from that pouliche. Then they're taken into a warm environment to raise, because then the yeast is activated more and it will rise. Then they're boiled, then they're baked, and they're also baked on wood and then onto stone. And they have a very tough, chewy texture.
In 1907, Joel Russ started trading, selling herrings from a barrel, and by 1914 he had a store in Orchard Street. In 1920, his company, Russ and Daughters, moved into their East Houston Street store, perhaps the most famous in New York, and they're still there today. Co-owner Josh Russ Tupper is part of the fourth generation to run the company.
So Russ and Daughters was founded by my great-grandfather, Joel Russ, who came over from Galicia, Poland, Ukraine, now area of Eastern Europe, around the turn of the century, I think 1907, and started selling herrings and dried Polish mushrooms from a pushcart on Orchard Street. He soon after opened his first store on Orchard Street and expanded the fare that he sold to appetizing. He then moved that store to Houston Street, and he had 3 daughters and no sons. So after a few years of them being in the business, he named the business Russ and Daughters. And this was the first business in New York, and probably this country, named and daughters, not and sons, which is something that we're very proud of.
So what exactly is appetizing?
So appetizing as a noun is a New York tradition. It is the opposite tradition from deli. So deli is meat, and appetizing is dairy and smoked and cured fish. So we are an appetizing store, and this used to be a very popular business in New York. And on the Lower East Side, when my great-grandfather opened, there may have been 50 appetizing stores. And we sell smoked salmon, other smoked fish, herring that's cured, bagels, cream cheese. This simple explanation of appetizing is the foods that you can put on a bagel. So in New York, Russ and Daughters is known for bagel knocks. We're the place to go to get your traditional bagel, your schmear, and your favorite type of smoked salmon. And the process that we use for making bagels is really a traditional New York bagel making process. We make the dough in the recipe that was very traditional, a touch of sweetness, the right crust, the right crumb on the inside. We water boil the bagels to give it the right crust, and then bake them perfectly. Now this process takes 2 days, and often you see people, even around New York, but around the country, making bagels in a way that's not the traditional way, and it just is not the same. So to make a real traditional New York bagel, you have to take the time and put the love in and make sure it comes out perfectly.
The voyage of the Bagel went to Canada's Montreal too. In 1919, Isidore Schlafman arrived looking for work as a bagel baker. Finding no such bakeries, he enlisted the help of a stonemason he met on the boat coming over to build a bagel oven in a rented shack. Erwin Schlafman is the co-owner of the Fairmount Bakery and Isidore's grandson.
The bagel in Montreal started in 1919 when my grandfather arrived here from Kiev. He was one of many leaving the Ukraine at that time, and he got on a boat for the New World. He didn't know exactly where he was going, and it ended up that he got off the boat in Montreal, and he looked for a job as a bagel baker. There were no bagel bakeries in Montreal, so he did the next best thing. He built a bagel oven, and he started baking bagel. And that was the birth of bagel in Montreal.
In Montreal bagels, they are a slightly different shape. They've got a bigger hole in them, so there's less surface area for spreadage or spreading on. They are made by a more regular bread dough method. It's a bread dough which you leave to rise. You take your lump of dough, make your bagel shape straight into the boiling water, which has honey in it, which also differentiates it from the others. Quick boil and then to bake, and that's also baked on wood in a wood-fired oven, which gives it a very nice crispy wood-fired crust.
He bought this cottage. He moved in here with my grandmother and one of my aunts. They lived upstairs, and he built the bagel oven downstairs in the living room. He knocked down the back wall of the house, which was the back of the living room, and he built the bagel oven into the backyard. And that was necessary, obviously, because the bagel oven is 12 feet deep. It's about 11 feet wide and about 8 or 9 feet high, including the foundation. So the face of the oven was in the living room, and the bulk of the oven was outside in the backyard. And my grandfather, living here, would go downstairs at 5 in the afternoon and start baking, and he would bake until 5 a.m., and that's when the driver would come in, pick up all the bagel that had been baked, and then deliver them throughout the city. Where I'm sitting was my grandparents' bed. This was their bedroom. It went a little further. There was a bit of remodeling upstairs over the years. But where I sit here is exactly where his bed was, and this is where he took his final breath. He died at home, right here where I sit every day. And it makes me feel great to be here. So I really think like I was supposed to carry this on. Well, he brought the recipe with him that he had learned in Russia as a bagel baker, probably since he was a very young guy. He never went to school, and he was 19 when he arrived here. So I imagine, he was already a skilled bagel baker. I don't know if my great-grandfather was a bagel baker as well. It's possible. The reason for the honey in the water is so that the bagel could take on a certain type of sheen when they're baking and making their way through the oven. We make sure, according to our grandfather's recipe, that the bagel will come out light, fluffy, airy, have a nice crust on the outside, and when you eat it, you can eat 1, 2, 3, 4 in a row with nothing on them, just on their own, and then come back tomorrow for more. We follow many steps that many other places, bakeries, do not follow. And the reason for that is because there just is not time in a modified, technologically adapted bakery to do the steps that we do here. We have no technology here. The only thing that we have that's of the modern world is our mixer, and that runs on electricity. And in 1900, they had electricity, and that mixer was running on electricity then too. That's the only piece of equipment that we have here that relates to the production of our bagel. We mix the dough in the mixer, the dough comes out onto the table, we manipulate it by hand, we roll the dough by hand, form the bagels by hand, we cook them in the honey water in our big kettle, and then we bake them in our wood-fired oven. And that's it. We do about 1,000 dozen a day. Well, if you look at a place like Lender's, for example, or any place that uses, say, a revolving oven with 6 trays on it, 6 shelves, 2 trays per shelf, you're talking about 4 dozen per shelf, 24 dozen. It takes about 25 minutes to bake that. You're getting about 50 dozen an hour out of a revolving oven. You got a bagel machine that produces 300 dozen per hour. So you put that bagel machine together with 2 or 3 of those ovens, and you do the math. In a place that has 4 or 5 or 6 ovens and a couple of bagel machines, you could be producing 20,000 dozen per day. We produce 1,000 dozen a day. And the reason that you're here talking to us is because we do that. We do it traditionally. we haven't adapted to the technology. And what you eat here, the bagel that you will eat here today, will be the same bagel that your grandfather would have eaten had he come into my grandfather's store 100 years ago.
Fairmount is known as the home of the special sesame seed bagel. How did that come about?
In 1952, a man came in here with a little bag of sesame seeds, and he asked my grandfather if he wouldn't mind making a dozen bagel for him with sesame seed, because the poppy seed made their way up on top of his dentures, and once he started to eat the bagel, it didn't take very long before he couldn't chew anymore. He had to take his teeth out, rinse them off, and then start again. So he asked my grandfather, please make these sesame seed bagels for me. So he did, and it worked for him. And before you know it, the neighborhood, when people in the area started coming in with their little baggies of sesame seeds, took about 3 months, and then my grandfather started to make them on his own. And they were called in those days specials. So if you came in here to Fairmount Bagel in 1952 onwards, and you would ask for a dozen specials, you would get a dozen sesame seed bagel. And if you asked for a dozen bagel, you'd get a dozen poppy seed bagel. And it was just that simple, and that was the birth of the sesame seed bagel here in Montreal.
In Israel, we come to the Jerusalem bagel. It's round and it has a hole. But is it a bagel or even a bagel? Many are sold in the busy Shuk Mahane Yehuda.
Okay, Jerusalem bagels, the last of the list, but actually not really a bagel. It gets lumped into the category because it has that same shape. In fact, it's more oval, but there is a hole in the middle. It's a regular bread roll. Maybe it's baked at high temperature, but it's coated in seeds. Delicious and brilliant for dipping in hummus or za'atar or whatever, but not a bagel.
We've seen how this staple of the Jewish shtetl or village spread to the Jewish communities of the world and their neighbours. But how did the bagel escape from the confines of the local bakery and hit the big time? Step forward, the Lender brothers.
Hello, bagel lovers. This is Murray Lender of Lender's Bagels. On my right side is my brother Sam, and on my left foot is my brother Marvin. We're here to...
Lender's Bagels started with my dad, who came from Lublin, Poland, in 1927. He was a baker there. My father first came to Passaic, New Jersey, and he worked in a bagel bakery there for about 6 months. One of the vendors, I think it was a flour vendor, came in, saw him working, and said that he knew of a bakery, not a bagel bakery, but a bakery in New Haven, Connecticut. And my father, who, by the way, at that point probably couldn't read or write English, and he could barely speak English, but he relocated from New Jersey to New Haven, Connecticut. Within 2 years, he went from this 400 square foot bakery that he bought in New Haven. Don't ask me where he got the money, but because he came to the States with no money, but he was quite the business guy, believe it or not, and somehow was able to do this. In 1929, he moved from that 400 square foot bakery to a 1,600 square foot bakery in a residential area in a garage. It was nothing more than an oversized garage. And someone had put an oven in, and they were baking, I don't even know what products, probably Italian bread if I had to guess. And my father converted it to a bagel oven in a little bagel shop. That's where it all started. The family didn't leave that garage, that bakery, until 1960. When I was growing up at 8 or 9 years old, or maybe even younger, I would go into the garage, the bakery, and I learned how to make bagels with my hands.
Evolution has a strange way of providing synchronicity. At the same time the Lender brothers were looking at ways to extend distribution, In California, the Thompson family were looking at ways to increase production.
We were introduced to for lack of a better term, an inventor in Los Angeles whose father was making bagels. And he was a school teacher. His name was Dan Thompson. And he started to develop a machine that could actually shape the bagel. And but he couldn't go too far with it because he had no one to work with. So we went out to California. My brother in the business did, and encouraged him to bring the machine to New Haven, Connecticut, to this garage. And we helped him further develop the machine. And that machine changed the industry.
Maya, or Mickey Thompson's family, came from Eastern Europe to the USA via Hull in England and Winnipeg, Canada, before finally settling in Los Angeles. Mickey had filed his first patent for a bagel machine in 1918 and had been experimenting ever since. His son Dan returned from being an Air Force hero in World War II and completed his degree in engineering arts. Working together, the Thompsons produced the world's first successful bagel forming machine. This historic footage is of the first tests of them operating their prototype. The Thompson Bagel Company is still one of the largest manufacturers of these machines in the world.
And ultimately, we made our own machines. We had a parting of the ways. With that, we had to make the equipment that could feed the machine and eliminate all hand labor. And that was the beginning of automation for bagels. So I went to 4 years at Syracuse University. And when I came home, I came into the business with, my father had died in 1960, unfortunately at a very early age. So my two of my older brothers were in the business with him, my brother Sam and my brother Murray. And I left college with a degree and went from college back into the garage where I grew up. That was the beginning of the expansion of our business. There were now 3 Lender brothers, and we had no choice but to expand the business because the little backyard couldn't afford to support 3 families, and I got married in 1964. Now, up until that point, all bagels were being marketed and sold fresh. And you know that a bagel only has a, outside of a package, not more than I would say, 12 to 18 hour shelf life. So the first thing that we did was to package the bagels, not frozen, but package the bagel. And we put 6 bagels into what was then a polyethylene bag, which gave us the opportunity to put our name on the bag, because prior to that we were selling bulk bagels. We evolved from that packaged bagel because we wanted to get away from the chemicals and make it a healthy product, which it always was, is, and will be. And so we removed the chemical additive and decided to go to frozen. Once we started to freeze the bagels, we had unlimited distribution.
So look for Lender's Bagels in your grocer's freezer. Why, you ask? Because that's where we put them.
We rode the wave of frozen foods. That part was what my father would say was mazel, luck, and we got on that bandwagon, and in 20 years, we created a brand.
A Lender's Bagel is like a perfect day.
We had it in every supermarket. We were approved to go in every supermarket in the country. We took it from it being a Jewish product to a product that everybody wanted to eat. At the end, it was Murray and I who took it from, a pretty good level, a pretty good foundation, to a large company. And I had the perfect relationship with my brother. He was a sales and marketing guy.
Hi, I'm Murray Linder. I'm here in the bread aisle. I haven't gone soft.
And I was a manufacturing business. We ended up, when I got out of school, we had 7 people working for us. When we sold the company to Kraft, we had 700, and we had 4 plants, 3 of them in the greater New Haven area, and 1 in Buffalo, New York. And we became a relatively large company. And at the end, we made bagels in this country as important as American apple pie.
Food is seen as an important part of Jewish culture, and it's been described as the glue that bonds our people together. A tongue-in-cheek description of many Jewish festivals is, "They tried to destroy us. We prevailed. Let's eat." Where is the Bagel in all this? We asked Rabbi Dr. Frank Dabber-Smith for his take on it.
I'd like to say a few words about the what some might think is the holiest bread in Jewish culture. You might think it's holy because it has a hole, but through the middle of it, but actually it isn't. It's a humble gastronomic delight from Eastern Europe. Bread in the Torah is just a completely basic staple. And this is obviously descended from the pagan farmers in the ancient Middle East. And Judaism imbued this bread with new meaning. We see offerings in temple ritual having to do with unleavened bread. And of course, unleavened bread existed in the form of what we call matzah, which is the bread of affliction, the bread of poverty, the bread of slavery that the Hebrews, the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, ate and carried on their backs when they rushed out of Egypt, fleeing Pharaoh's army and trekking across the Sinai desert to the Promised Land. I'd like to say also that the bread is blessed on Friday evenings before we have the Shabbat meal and on festivals. And this is in gratitude to God for bringing the food out of the earth, the bread out of the earth, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, and that we partake. And it exists right up there with the other primary symbol of eating, which is a wine from the grapes. So we have the grapes and the bread, the wine and the bread, as basic staples of Jewish ritual. I grew up in San Diego, California, Southern California, and it was basically a surfer's paradise. Wasn't terribly Jewish. Los Angeles was Jewish, kind of. New York was really Jewish. But in San Diego, growing up as a Reformed Jew, I didn't even know that Orthodoxy existed until I was about 18. And there was sort of Fiddler on the Roof, and then there was us. And at our bar mitzvah celebrations, the starters were usually shrimp cocktails. A dearth of Jewish food, no real kosher nostra around. But we always had bagels at home. My parents always had bagels, usually with cream cheese. Lox was too expensive. And my parents, their digestions were too delicate for goodies like pastrami, but you couldn't get that in San Diego anyway. I wouldn't even bother. But we always had bagels. And that, to me, was the core of my Jewish identity.
So where next in the Bagel's diaspora? As we said earlier, Bagel production stopped in Eastern Europe with the Holocaust. But over 20 years ago, American Christopher DeKime thought it should go home to the Jewish quarter of Krakow.
Bagel Mama was born because actually when I first moved here to be with my Polish partner, there was a big lack of, this was 20 some odd years ago, a very different place. There was a lack of sandwiches, for example, and being an American, sandwiches are in my DNA, and I was just like looking for a sandwich or a bagel or something, and that didn't exist. So that was the motivation for starting a small bagel shop 20 years ago. I brought the bagel back to Poland, and actually at that time, when I started, I did not know that the bagel was born in Poland. I simply thought that it might be a nice idea to bring the bagel back to the Jewish district, which was very dilapidated 20 years ago, as opposed to now. It's become rather gentrified. So we were the only bagel shop for many, many years in the whole country.
Once the Bagel had spread round the world and back again, then as humanity expands off the planet, the only way is up. The first man in space came from Klishino in Russia. The first Bagel in space came from Montreal, Canada.
Well, yeah, actually, my cousin, Gregory Shamatov, was an astronaut, and he went up to the space station in May of 2008 on mission STS-124.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of Shuttle Discovery. Combate Kudasai. Best of luck to the International Space Station's newest laboratory.
Discovery, roll program. Roger, roll, Discovery.
And all the astronauts were given the option of a wish list of foods that they would like to see on the spacecraft going up and then possibly on the space station.
Greg Shamatov is catching a ride on STS-124 to the station, where he will remain and become a flight engineer for Expedition 17.
So he said that he wanted to have his cousin's bagel from Montreal. So NASA sent us an email, and we forwarded them a couple of dozen sesame seed bagel for them to do their testing on. And they got back to us a couple of weeks later and told us that the bagel were okay to send, and we could go ahead and send them, and they would be put on the shuttle for the astronauts to eat. And when I went to see my cousin the day before the liftoff, you know, there's a rope they have across the road, and the astronauts are all quarantined. They don't let them get near anyone. And he yelled out from across the street that there were 18 Fairmount Bagel up on the space shuttle, which was fuming away just in the background. Like, this was within 24 hours before the launch, right? So you see the smoke coming out of the jets. I guess they have to warm it up or whatever for a couple of days before they send it out to space. So within an hour, my sister, who was here in Montreal watching the bakery, got a call from CBC. And the question was, is it true that your bagel are on the space shuttle? One of our reporters was just down covering the launch and said that they heard one of the astronauts say that Fairmount Bagel were on the space shuttle. So then we had a whole big hoopla about that here in Montreal.
You can put anything you like on a bagel. We've heard everything from crispy bacon to caviar, or even strawberries and cream. But what's your favourite?
Cream cheese and smoked salmon.
Cream cheese and smoked salmon.
Well, yes, I suppose, but I do like chopped liver as well.
Peanut butter and bananas.
Pastrami and or chopped liver.
Salmon. Everything bagel. Scooped out, a thin schmear of horseradish cream cheese. On top of that, a thin schmear of whitefish and baked salmon salad. A thin slice of wild Western Nova that we sell. An extra thin slice of onion and tomato. And maybe 4 capers.
I mean, I have smoked turkey.
Smoked salmon.
Well, I like egg. Fried egg.
I'd say salmon, smoked cheese, all different types of cheeses.
My favourite bagel filling would be smoked salmon. It's for me, with a bit of butter, smoked salmon, lemon, give maybe the cream cheese, maybe not, but smoked salmon, just and a white bagel, ooh, delicious.
The bagel is now a firm international fixture, with billions being eaten by millions worldwide every year. This most secular of Jewish breads is the one that connects Jews most to their heritage. Yet most bagel lovers don't even realise it's a Jewish thing.
And you go to places like Japan, Vietnam, there are bagel bakeries there in the Far East. So it blows your mind.
It's hard to find a country in the world where bagels are not served and enjoyed. So you say bagel and I'll say bagel. But as long as they taste good, what's in a name? Pass the smoked salmon.